Good morning and welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly Hot Topics educational webinar series. I'm Shannon Montoya, and I'd like to first remind you of a few things before we get started. These calls are recorded to listen to again at your availability on the nanp.org website. You can also earn 1 continuing education credit for participating in Scoop webinars and by taking the corresponding quiz that can be found in the membership area of the website. I'd also like to invite you to share your hot educational topic with NANP. Are you doing great work in clinical research and applications? Have you started up a business or nonprofit that you'd like to share your experiences? NANP wants to highlight all that speaks to our nutrition professional community, so email me at shannon@nanp.org. Today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so please feel free to type your questions throughout the webinar so we can get to as many as possible. So let's get started. Jeffrey Anschel is our guest today, and he is a doctor of ophthalmology. And today he will be presenting on the role of cannabis in eye health. Jeffrey is a graduate from the Illinois College of Optometry, and he's written numerous articles and 6 books regarding nutritional influences on vision, stress factors that affect visual performance, and computer vision concerns. Dr. Anschel is the principal of Corporate Vision Consulting, where he addresses the issues surrounding the visual demands while viewing digital images. He also lectures nationally on the topic of nutrition and eye care. Dr. Anschel is a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry and founder of the Ocular Nutrition Society, and currently maintains a full-service practice in Encinitas, California. And today he is here with us to present on the role of cannabis in eye health. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Anschel.
Thank you, Shannon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the introduction. So we're going to be speaking about cannabinoids and ocular health. And first, just give you a little bit of a background on myself. And there it is. I am on the advisory board for a couple of companies, also a consultant for several companies. And as Shannon mentioned, I'm the past president and founding director of the Ocular Nutrition Society, and also on the editorial advisory board for several of the magazines. So what we're going to do is make something perfectly clear to me and try to make it clear to you, and hopefully not overwhelm you with too much technical information. But obviously, if you have any questions, please feel free to, type them in, and we'll get to them at the end. And let's get going on the eye. So many of you may have a medical or semi-medical background and have studied the eye in the past. Usually you do during your biology days. But let's go through this so everybody's on the same page and we can talk about how the eye works and how it functions in normal environment and how it's affected by the rest of your body. So when light comes into the eye, typically it hits the cornea, and that's the clear dome covering the front of the eye. And it serves 2 main purposes. Number 1, protection, because if you ever get an eyelash in there, you know how painful it is. So it's very protective. But also you'll notice it's a steeper curve than the rest of the eye. And that curve makes it act like a lens that starts the focusing process so light can focus on the retina. And after it goes through the cornea, it enters through the pupil, which is nothing more than a hole in the colored iris of the eye. And this hole gets bigger and smaller depending on your lighting situations. You go into a movie theater, the pupil gets real big, so you get more light in your eyes. And you go back outside and it gets small again, so you don't get too much light into your eyes. So the pupil is constantly opening and closing depending on the ambient lighting environment. And then the light goes through the lens. Now this lens is what's called a crystalline lens, and it actually changes its shape to allow you to focus from distance to near. Think of the lens as the size and shape of a plain M&M, And it gets thicker and thicker as you focus up close and gets thinner as you focus at distance. And it continually changes its focus depending on where you want to look. And then light goes through this clear gel in the center of the eye to reach the retina. And the yellowish portion of the retina, you will see, covers about 2/3 of the back of the eye. So we have retina covering a lot of the back of the eye, but the light focuses at just one little point, and you'll see it's a little bit of a dip in the retinal area, and that area is called the macula. Now that may sound familiar if you've heard of macular degeneration. That's a disease that happens in older folks, and something we can address later, but basically this is your sharpest vision is in the macula. That's where you get your 20/20 from. The rest of the retina is used for side vision, and that's important for navigating yourself around, and especially for driving. And it's important that the whole retina is important in our ability to, again, see and to move around. And then once the light hits the retina, the nerve impulse that it generates goes through the optic nerve and back to the brain. And that area of the optic nerve is nerve tissue. And number one, it does not have any rods or cones in that area. So it is a blind spot in the eye, but it's off to the side and it's covered by a seeing portion of the other eye. So you really never notice that you have a blind spot. But also it's the softest area in the back of the eye. And if the pressure gets too high inside the eye, it starts to push back on that nerve. And that condition is called glaucoma. And that's something we can see when we look into the eye. So what we're going to talk about today is the cannabis issue. And this is what most people think about cannabis. They've heard about the devil's weed and reefer madness and how smoking Mary Jane is simply insane. So unfortunately, this is the view that most people have about cannabis. And that's what we're going to refer to because it's marijuana is a kind of a slang name for it, but I prefer to go by the botanical name, which is cannabis. In herbal medicine, and this is basically where this is, plants have been used for medicinal purpose for years, eons basically. Ancient Chinese and Egyptian writings describe medicinal uses for plants over 30,000 or 3,000 years ago, 3000 BC. And again, herbs have been used for so long, and actually about 70% of the pharmaceutical products that we're using today have their root in herbal medicine. So it's something that we've been using for a long time, and we've known about that plants have medicinal values. In the early 19th century, chemical analysis first became available when scientists began to extract the ingredients from these plants, and then they basically made their own versions of these plant compounds and used these compounds as medicines. But it's over time, the drugs have kind of taken over. So that's the problem. About a fourth of our pharmaceutical drugs are derived from botanical extracts. Now, the history of cannabis is amazing because it goes back as one of the oldest drugs used for medicinal purposes. We're talking almost 2700 BC in China. So it's it has medical benefits to it, and it's been used throughout the rest of the world, certainly India, Greece, and several other continents on a regular basis for long periods of time. It was first introduced on a larger scale to the Western medicine back in the 19th century, primarily by British doctors. They recommended it as an appetite stimulant, as an analgesic, muscle relaxant, anticonvulsant, and also a hypnotic. In 1937, the American Marijuana Tax Act was intended to prevent the non-medical use, but it got a little carried away and basically made cannabis difficult to obtain for medical purposes. And so it was subsequently removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in 1942. So since it's been outlawed, the research on cannabis has been limited, and the U.S. government does not support much research in cannabis. It is basically a Schedule I drug. Now, Schedule I drugs basically have no current accepted medical use, but there is a high potential for abuse. restriction on use and availability, restricted for research, as I mentioned, even in animals. And its funded research is to demonstrate harm. So typically they show how harmful these medications can be, these drugs. The medical research often relies on opportunity and reported street use. So again, no controlled studies, just other types of studies. And the research impact on all medical studies, and we really don't know what the subject is using when we use a Schedule I drug, because the potencies are varied. They're all over the chart. So it's very difficult to know how different potencies react with different body functions. So here's a listing of the Schedule I drugs, and heroin, LSD, mescaline, ecstasy, GHB, psilocybin, methylone, quaaludes. So you can see these things are pretty nasty. The one that doesn't really seem to fit in there is marijuana or cannabis. It's considered the same effects as everything else on this list, which is kind of silly. Because in 2003, the U.S. patented cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants. So it's a bit of a oxymoron here that a cannabis be scheduled as a Schedule I drug when there's a U.S. patent on these cannabinoids as a antioxidant and neuroprotective effects. So is it a medication or is it no medical benefit? It's the U.S. government seems to be saying both. So looking at cannabis, there's three basic species, indica, sativa, and ruderalis, which is a third one. The female cannabis flower bud glands and have about 40 to 20% concentration is where the chemicals are the strongest and provide the most psychoactive euphoria effects. Typically, the sativa is the version that's used for daytime use. You get a very energetic, mind high. Your thought processes accelerate. It stimulates your appetite, enhances your creativity, relieves depression, and it has the higher THC levels. We'll talk about THC in just a minute. Indica is almost the counteractive to this. It's used more at night. You get a lot of body sensations, but it's very sedative, and it relieves anxiety and causes sleepiness. And for people who don't sleep well, and which does happen as people get older, this is a great sleep inducer. It does also relieve pain, and it has high CBD levels. And again, we'll talk about CBD as well. So these are almost opposites, but what we do see is that, as you see on top, these two species, or even sometimes the third species as well, is often crossbred. So most of the time, what you're taking in marijuana is some kind of a cross or hybrid of these different species. So the THC that I mentioned, and that's delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the cannabinoid responsible for the psychoactive effect. This is the one that gets you high. And this compound does have an analgesic and shows that it has also antioxidant activity. So it does have some medical benefits. Now, if you take too much of it, you get the psychoactive part of it takes over, and you don't really realize what is happening in the rest of your body. So it's more of a mind high, if you will. The cannabidiol is the second most common cannabinoid, and one that has the most medical benefits, and we'll go through a lot of these as we go on. It has a non-psychoactive effect. So, you can take CBD in massive quantities for the most part, and you're going to get little or no psychoactive effect. There are some CBD cannabis that have higher CBD contents, but they're less likely to experience anxiety. So it does have a little bit of a calming effect. It also does inhibit cancer cell growth, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So the CB1 receptors, two different receptors in the body. CB1 is the first one, and this is the one that primarily is linked to the THC or psychoactive molecule. And these are found predominantly in the central nervous system, some connective tissue, some of the gonads, glands, and other organs. It's not found in the medulla oblongata, which is responsible for cardiovascular or respiratory systems. So there are no CB1 receptors there, so it's not going to affect these systems. So it's not, that's why people do not die from smoking marijuana, because it's no risk on cardiovascular or respiratory systems. But the CB receptors are responsible for the euphoric and anticonvulsive effects. One of the main ones being Parkinson's disease, and also anything that Alzheimer's is the other one. So we need to remember that the eyes are connected to the body. So the eyeballs are receivers of light, but their effects, they transmit the images back to the back part of the brain, which is where they start forming images and start interacting with the rest of the body. So you got to remember that when we talk about the eye, we're actually talking about direct connections from the brain. Now, the CB2 receptors are found primarily in the immune system, mostly in the spleen. And they're a more peripheral nervous system in the autonomic nervous system, and responsible for anti-inflammatory and other therapeutic effects. We'll go through quite a few of these. The CB2 receptors are more attuned to the CBD molecule. So on the left, we'll see that there's the cannabinoid receptor in the cell membrane, and the THC will actually attach that to that and create that euphoric, relaxation, anxiety, and short-term memory impairment effects. Now on the right, we have a CBD involved, and the CBD will block off the THC from entering that receptor. So CBD will actually decrease the effect of the THC. So if somebody, takes in, which is common when people eat cannabis, that they'll kind of overdose on it, if you will. You can take some CBD and it will help to bring that psychoactive effect down a little bit. And it's actually a way to reverse the effects of THC. Now, the reason that we have these actions of these plant molecules affecting us is because we have these receptors in the body. And these receptors are part of the endocannabinoid system. When we talk about marijuana in the plants, those are phytocannabinoids from the plants. But we have to have an endocannabinoid system, because there are receptors in the body, in the brain, and all these other systems that can receive this same type of molecule. So it's a very wordy slide here, but just know that these the THC on the right, you can see the THC molecules on the top in green, and the other cannabinoids. These receptors affect the transmission of neurotransmitters in the nerve synapse. So that's how these get affected. And the THC stimulates, and the CBD calms or reverses some of these effects. All right, so that's how it's effective. So the first cannabinoid that was discovered is called anandamide, and the Greek name for that is the bliss molecule. And the second one was called 2-arachidonyl glycerol, or 2-AG. And that was, now both of these chemicals are ultimately made from the essential fatty acids. So here's your first nutritional link to these things. They're found in fish and seed oil, and these are the analogs for the omega-6 fatty acid, arachidonic acid. So these molecules are connected to the fatty acid system, the metabolic system, in the processing of fish oils and essential fatty acids. And so they affect the brain, and what they do in the brain is they can actually reduce the likelihood of strokes and increase cognition. The THC, sativa increases brain activity and creativity. Okay, Also in the liver, it can actually increase good cholesterol and decrease inflammation. For fatty deposits, it increases metabolic flexibility and can actually reduce body weight. In the heart, it can reduce heart disease and stroke. It can, in the circulation, can reduce insulin and blood pressure. And in muscles, it can actually increase endurance and decrease muscle wasting. So it has a lot of positive effects in these different organ systems. Now, as I mentioned, CBD has a lot of medical benefits and a lot of physiological effects. And you can see here the CBD, of all these molecules in the cannabinoids, the CBD has the most. And, you can go through these: an antipsychotic, anti-epileptic, neuroprotective, antispasmodic, it goes on and on and on. And, again, it has a lot of positive effects. And the other, and by the way, there's about 80 different molecules in the endocannabinoids. So these are just a few of them that we're looking at here. And you can see they all have positive physical effects. And because they have these effects, they can affect different diseases that are coming up. And you can see in the different areas of the body, you can have a lot of different effects on therapeutic uses for the medical marijuana. So, and here's another breakdown of it. And again, across the top, we have a lot of the different molecules. Look at the one in the middle, the THCV and CBGA. The A is the acid form of these molecules. And they also have when you see the plant before it's processed or before it's heated, the molecules are in the acid form, and they go through a process when they're heated. So it becomes a different form of the molecule, and then has different effects in the body. So like, for example, if you're eating cannabis leaves in a salad, for example, you'll get the THCA and the CBDA molecules, which can have anti-inflammatory effects, but they have no psychoactive effects. So this is just one of the things that we look at. So as you can see, if you go down the CBD column, a lot of effects in the body. And there's another chart that shows you even more of these CBD effects. So again, that's why CBD is such a popular molecule now, and because it has so many positive effects on the body. So I'm sure you're all familiar with DSHEA, the 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and how it talks about nutritional supplements, what a dietary supplement is, a product taken by mouth that contains dietary ingredient, including vitamins, minerals, herbs, and botanicals. And I'm sure you remember that the disclaimer of these statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Product is not intended to diagnose, cure, prevent, or treat any disease. So because CBD has no psychoactive effect, it does contain typically about less than 0.3% THC. It really, can be considered a dietary supplement. And a lot of the CBD companies have been working hard on getting this approved. So you can actually find CBD in a lot of health food stores and vitamin stores, for example. And actually, I carry them in my office as well. I'm a consultant for one of the CBD companies, and I carry their products. Now, does it have a direct effect on the eye? Well, there's no research right now besides the glaucoma issue, and we'll talk about that in a minute, on CBD for eye effects. But again, remember, the eyes are connected to the brain. So I'm sure that there are some effects because there are CB1 and CB2 receptors in the eye. So the number one thing that we relate to the eye when it comes to cannabis is glaucoma. And of course, why should glaucoma patients have all the fun? Glaucoma is actually a death of the optic nerve, usually due to excessive pressure inside the eye. And when somebody looks at something, they can still see it, but glaucoma reduces the peripheral vision, and because it affects blood flow into the eye. So the peripheral vision is affected first. So you can still see what you're looking at, but you're losing your side vision. And this is a gradual process that you will never know unless you get your side vision tested. And typically we don't get our side vision tested because everybody thinks they can just read an eye chart and they have 20/20 and they think they have perfect vision. So reading an eye chart is not the same as a full eye exam. This is something that we need to test individually. And glaucoma is more common in people over 30 years old. And but you know, again, if you don't have it by the time you're 6, you probably won't have it till you're 30. Typically, we don't test kids or young adults for glaucoma. Sometimes because it's such an easy test these days, we will do it. Or if it's in their family, we will test for glaucoma. And typically, we look at the optic nerve to see if it's looks like it's under pressure, or we test the eye pressure itself. So in the normal eye on the left, all right, you see the eye, and you see these channels in the front. On the right, you can see if pressure builds up. We've noticed the what's called the trabecular meshwork over in this angle between the iris and the front of the cornea, in that buildup of fluid in that area. That's typically where the fluids, if you look just below the lens, you'll see this that kind of grayish area. That's where fluids are produced in the eye. And these fluids are important in nourishing the internal structures of the eye because they're transparent fluids. They don't have blood. Anyway, the fluid flows between the lens and the iris into that anterior chamber in there, and then it drains out that area called the trabecular meshwork. Now, if the if the drainage of the fluid is not adequate, or too much fluid is produced, the pressure will start to build up on the eye. And it will push onto all the structures in the eye. And as I mentioned, that optic nerve in the back is the softest part of the eye, and it will take that pressure and push against the optic nerve, essentially killing the nerve in the long run. It doesn't allow proper blood flow into the nerve, and also restricts the nerve transmissions. So on the left, again, you look at the trabecular, what we call the anterior chamber angle, and that angle between the iris and the cornea. And over on the right, again, the trabecular meshwork. And on the left, you're going to see a normal optic nerve. And this is as we're looking into the eye from the front of the eye. This is what the doctor sees when he looks at the what we call the nerve head, or the the entry of the optic nerve into the eye. And this, we call it the optic disc because it's shaped, like a disc with a sharp edge around it. So this pinkish area in the middle is the nerve tissue. And you'll see that little whitish area in the center. And that's a normal little dip in the nerve. If you look at the palm of your hand and go around the palm of your hand, you'll see the palm with a little bit of a dip in the center of the palm. It's similar to that. And that's a normal thing, okay? We see that normally, a little bit of a dip in there. And you see there's nice, healthy pink tissue all the way around it. And on the right, you'll see that whitish area is huge, and the pinkish areas are thinned out, and the actual blood vessels are actually skewed off to the side. So that is the nerve head of somebody with glaucoma. So those are extreme examples, but this is how it goes. And because it pushes on the optic nerve like that, it reduces the blood flow into the eye as well, and that's why the side vision is lost. So it was reported in 1971 that there was people who were smoking marijuana had a 25 to 30% reduction in the eye pressure, okay? And that's kind of significant because IOP is intraocular pressure. And so that's what we measure, is the pressure inside the eye. And reducing the eye pressure 25 to 30% is huge. They were looking to see what happened in the tissue, and they realized that the effect reduced the production of the fluids, also increased the outflow of the fluid. So it kind of had a dual effect in both reducing the production and lowering the production and increasing the outflow of fluids in the eye. The bad news is the dose-response relationship was only lasting 3 to 4 hours. So people would need to smoke again in 3 to 4 hours to maintain this lower eye pressure. Otherwise, the pressure goes back up, and their glaucoma is a problem. So the receptors in the eye are around that ciliary, the stars on the top, on the left. You can see the ciliary body. That's the area that the fluids are generated and where the outflow happens. Okay, but there's also receptors in the back of the eye as well. And the red receptors are CB1 receptors for THC, and the blue is for CBD. So there's both CB1 and CB2 receptors in the retina, and there's mostly CB1 receptors in the front of the eye. So the CB2, while it is neuroprotective, it doesn't really affect the production of the fluid or the drainage of the fluid in the front of the eye. So the studies that have been done show that the THC is what's responsible for lowering the eye pressure, not the CBD. And here we have the receptors in the retina. Now, the light is coming in from the left. And so it goes through the retina, and you see the colored rods and cones in the back. The rods are black because those are responsible for our black and white or night vision. And the cones are 3 different colors, red, green, and blue. And these color cones, are responsible for our sharpest vision in the macular area. So again, now there can't be any blood vessels in this zone because this is our sharpest vision. And you want to make sure that this area is clear. Okay, so the retina itself is actually invisible. It's clear, so light can get through it. And it stimulates the rods and cones that you see in color here. Now, when these rods and cones break off their little pieces of cells, because they have to regenerate themselves because they're so highly reactive, these little pieces of cells actually get transmitted through this membrane on the right, and this membrane has CB2 receptors in it. And so that is partially responsible for, if you will, taking out the trash that these rods and cones generate when they need to, regenerate themselves to see better and to clear the retina of these broken pieces of cells. So that's probably how the CB1, the CBD actually works in the back of the eye to help the nerve transmission. So it does not appear that marijuana can lower intraocular pressure for management of glaucoma because the effects are only 3 to 4 years. People would have to take the drug 6 to 8 times a day. Now there is synthetic marijuana out there. It's called Marinol, and but it doesn't really have the same effect as the cannabis itself. But there may be some characteristics of the components of these cannabinoids that may be neuroprotective in nature. So while we don't want to get people high all the time, we can protect the nerves. Now, going back to the causing of glaucoma, I said it's typically related to high eye pressure, but ironically, there are people that have high eye pressure and don't have glaucoma, because we look at the optic nerve and it looks healthy, and then we check their side vision and they're not losing any side vision. So they just have a high eye pressure. And so we call these people ocular hypertension, which means it's a high eye pressure. But there's also people that have normal eye pressure, but we look at their optic nerve and it has that carved out appearance, and also they're starting to lose peripheral vision. So these people have low tension glaucoma. So there's not 100% of anything here, because you can have people with low pressure that have glaucoma, people with high pressure that don't have glaucoma, or people with high pressure that do. So it's a real challenge for the doctors. And the real problem is that there are no symptoms of glaucoma. You have no pain, and for the most part, you have clear vision. So for people that think their eyes are perfect because they can see better, see 20/20, that may not be totally accurate. But we know that medical marijuana makes sense because it says so by the ultimate authority in healthcare, Dr. Oz. Now, one of the things that I came up with here, which really surprised me when I started looking at this issue, was macular degeneration. I briefly mentioned it in the beginning. And if you look at these pictures along the top here, this person on the left, see, does not have macular degeneration. But as the letters, as you move to the right, you can see that the central vision gradually gets more and more distorted. And the grid below it shows how the distortion occurs. And this is what we actually give to people who have macular degeneration to gauge how their vision is deteriorating, because when they look at this grid, they actually see these distortions in themselves. So this is, but on the top, you can see how it affects the vision itself. But if we look on the right side on what the cannabinoids do, they reduce ocular pressure, they reduce vascular endothelial growth factor. And let me just briefly talk about that second one down. The vascular endothelial growth factor. When you look at macular degeneration, there's two types. There's dry, which is the first type, and 90% of the people have the first type. And then there's the wet, which is the other 10%. So if you look on the right of those two pictures toward the bottom, the dry AMD has these little yellowish dots showing up. And those are little, we call them drusen, and they are deposits of the garbage that never got delivered out of the eye from the breaking off of the rods and cones. And these accumulations start affecting, the integrity of the retina, and they cause these little distortions. Now, the body says, look, if I can't get blood to the retina from the back, which it needs to do, I need to grow some more blood vessels to do this. So what it does is it goes to grow new blood vessels, which are not very strong, and they tend to leak, and they become wet macular degeneration. So this is how the process works. And these both cause severe distortions. So again, we see on the left a non-AMD retina. The optic nerve or optic disc is normal. The fovea, which is part of the macula, those are kind of used interchangeably. And that's clear. It has just a little tiny yellowish dot there. But if on the right, you can see, the macula, that no dot is visible in the middle there, that's because it's all swollen. And these drusen, those are the yellowish spots that form. And the optic nerve, you can see, is starting to get pale and lose its integrity. So that's how macular degeneration looks inside the eye. Just a couple of more differentiating the dry, which has those yellowish dots, and the swelling that happens in the wet. The only medical treatment, by the way, is an anti-cancer medication that is shot directly into the back of the eye. Not through the front, so it's not as painful, but it is a shot in the eye, and it does help improve vision for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then you need another shot. So you don't want to wait till it gets to wet macular degeneration. Drusen, these are the yellowish spots I talked about, how they form in the back of the eye, and they eventually block off the transmission of the blood vessels in the back to feeding the retina, because that's the direction light's coming in. So this is neovascularization is the term. Neo meaning new, vascular, blood vessels, and the growth of new blood vessels. This study shows that these cannabinoids restrict the sprouting of blood vessels in brain tumors by inhibiting this VEGF that starts the process of growing new blood vessels. Well, if it does it for brain tumors, it'll do it for macular degeneration also. So they showed that this VEGF needs to be, and the shot that they give you is that anti-cancer medication, which has anti-VEGF fluid in it. Neuroprotection, the results of this study indicated that cannabidiol, the CBD, exerts a combination of neuroprotective, antioxidant, and anti-apoptotic effects. Anti-apoptosis is the programmed death of cells. So it does help to prolong the life of cells, and the cannabidiol is involved in the signaling pathway for this neuroprotection. And same thing for Parkinson's. It's been shown to be very effective for Parkinson's to relieve, again, the neuro effects in the brain. And okay. I'm not sure this is going to show up. We're going to have to pass up. This is a video, and it doesn't really show up on webinars. So if you want to go to YouTube and type in Writing with Larry Part 3, you'll see an amazing video of how cannabis can reduce the symptoms of Parkinson's. Anyway, let's get to the non-psychoactive part and the nutritional part, which is hemp. Now, hemp can be grown in the US, but only if it's for research purposes. It's becoming more and more deregulated. And remember, it has 0.3, it's not 0.03, it's 0.3% THC. And you can see on the bottom how many things it can be used for. So it's really an amazing plant. And some of the more famous hemp growers, you might have heard of these guys, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams. Those were 3 hemp growers that are the founding fathers of our country. So, but hemp is a food. This is made in Canada, very popular in Canada. And you can eat the leaves that you can use in salads, and it's used for all kinds of types of different foods that can be used. But the seed oil is the amazing part because it's 44% of the weight of the hemp seed oil is edible, and it contains 80% of our essential fatty acids. It's also one of the highest concentrations of polyunsaturated fats, and it has an ideal omega-6, omega-3 balance to help dry eyes. And that's what we use in some of these other formulas to help people with dry eyes, is the proper balance of GLA, which has omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio of 4:1, which hemp seed oil also does as well. And here's the breakdown of the whole nutritional analysis of whole hemp seed, so you can review that at your leisure. And hemp has over 500 distinct compounds, and it has the essential fatty acids, different cannabinoids, terpenes, sterols, vitamin E, and chlorophyll. There's the essential fatty acids, and I'm sure you're all familiar with these. These are found in the total plant complex containing CBD oil. The terpenes, over 100, are detected. These are the molecules responsible for the aroma of plants, and they've been shown to interact with the receptors in different systems. Sterols, we're all familiar with plant sterols, how great they are for us. You can review these at your leisure. Vitamin E, we know that there's synthetic vitamin E, the DL, alpha tocopherol, and there's 8 different isomers of vitamin E, 4 tocopherols, and 4 different tocotrienols. But the tocotrienols have a lot of positive effects, but they're in smaller quantities. Mostly when we talk about vitamin E, we talk about D-alpha tocopherol. Make sure people are not getting the DL version, because that's the synthetic version. So again, the modern day uses for hemp can be used for everything, but the hemp seed oil and the seeds can be used for foods and for different cooking products. So there's a lot of things to use for hemp. And it's becoming more illegal, and obviously the Western states are getting on board with this as far as recreational cannabis goes. A lot of other states have medical marijuana going, so it's just becoming more popularized. Back in 2000 BC, people were eating roots. Here, eat this root. And then in 1000 AD, it was that root is heathen, say this prayer. 1850, that prayer is superstition, drink this potion. 1940, that potion is snake oil, swallow this pill. 1985, that pill is ineffective, take this antibiotic. And recently, that antibiotic is artificial. Here, eat this root. So things are going full circle as far as plants go. All right, I wanted to thank you for your attention, and I want to leave it open for questions if you have any.
All right.
So I'll turn it back to Shannon.
Yes. All right, Jeff, thanks for that information. I've got a couple of questions about smoking versus consumption in food form. You had mentioned that with the optic nerve pressure, there was a 25% reduction of eye pressure. You said that was
Right.
from smoking. Is there a way to get that type of effect through eating it or taking it as an oil, or is smoking the only way to get that effect?
Well, actually, that's one of the first questions that I asked when I saw that study. It's like, well, what about eating it?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I haven't seen any studies that actually reproduce that by eating it. Now, eating is, taking it orally is a whole different effect, because with when you smoke it, it goes into your lungs and straight into your blood system. When you eat it, it gets metabolized by the liver, and it takes a lot longer. So three things: it takes longer to take effect, which is dangerous because people eat a half a cookie and go, well, I don't feel anything, I'll eat the rest of the cookie. And next thing you know, they're double dosing on this. It takes longer to take effect, but the effect lasts a lot longer. So whereas if you smoke and you get high, the effect maybe lasts a couple hours. If you ingest the same amount, it could last 6 to 8 hours. So that's what I would think is I would like to see a study on ingesting cannabis, lower doses, because I'm a proponent of microdosing. Mm-hmm. Because what's available on the street right now is pretty high potency cannabis. So I've heard, and because I know back in the hippie days, you buy a bag here, you roll the whole joint, you can smoke a joint between people, and you get a little buzz. But these days it's a toke or two, and that's all people need. So it's mm-hmm. much more, and that's one of the problems with the research is knowing what potency you're getting. But right. Yeah, I agree. I would like to see the studies on eating it versus smoking it for glaucoma.
Yeah, and I know that different types of cannabis have the higher concentrations of the CBD versus the THC. And I don't recall if you said that right. Which one of those was more specific towards the eye pressure? Was it the
THC?
It was the THC.
Yeah, the psychoactive part, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, most of the receptors that control eye pressure are in the front of the eye, where the fluids are produced and drained.
Right, and I know there's a couple of different ways of ingesting the cannabis through, whether it's smoking or cooking or eating, like taking a tincture or putting it in raw. I know that it doesn't have a real high cooking point as far as ingesting it. So in the kind of in the realm that you're talking about, it seems like the best way, at least as far as research goes, smoking it is the optimal, or maybe the oils, eating the oils, or the plant, I think, is probably you'd have to have higher doses than smoking.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I think the smoking it is probably the least manageable way to do a study, because again, besides the potency of the marijuana itself, it's and then you have to look at the people who are in the study, because there's an acclimation effect, whereas people who smoke on a regular basis would need more to get high than somebody who doesn't smoke at all. Mm-hmm. So your body acclimates to what you're used to doing. I actually have patients who they smoke on a regular basis, so I can't give them some CBD and say, oh yeah, it's gonna be real effective for you, because it probably won't, because they're smoking on a regular basis. Versus someone who doesn't take any cannabis at all, giving them a little bit would probably be much more effective. So everybody's a little bit different. So that's why in general, that's why many studies are needed. Yeah. Because you have different genetics, you have different lifestyles. There's a lot of differences. That's why that's where the challenges come in research.
So are you aware of the kind of the research, where we are in research? Is the research that's being done for these medical conditions, are they government? Are they not government funded? Do they need to be more privately funded, or is there a change happening? What is kind of the political climate with research these days?
Well, actually, I just saw a study, and I've submitted to receive the whole study. I just saw an abstract looking at glaucoma and cannabinoids. And when I looked at the researchers, they were all from Iran. Mm-hmm. And I know there's companies in Israel that are doing studies on eye drops for dry eyes using CBD.
Oh, nice.
And I know that there's several companies in Spain that are doing research on this. So yeah, there's no research going on. Yes, it may be government sponsored, but not by this government.
Right. Interesting.
So, very, very limited. As long as it's still Schedule 1, it's going to have limited availability for research.
Yeah, I think a lot of the more complementary research that we've got in the States comes from other countries, like with essential oils and herbal studies. There's a lot more going on, research that we've gotten from those other countries. We've got a question from Steve. He wants to know if CBD or THC has any impact on floaters in the eyes. If you have any.
Boy, if I could sell floaters, I'd be retired in the island in Maui. Yeah, floaters are a challenge. First of all, floaters are normal because before you're born, there's blood vessels that literally grow through the optic nerve, through the center of the eye to feed the front of the eye to grow the front of the eye. And they grow into, through this channel that's in the gel part of the eye. Mm-hmm. And just before birth, all these blood vessels kind of dissolve because they're done doing their job. Well, not all the blood vessels dissolve completely. So this gel that's sitting in the middle of your eye has these little specks of cells that are floating in it. I like to, use the analogy of bananas in the jello. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and typically you don't see them because they're may not be too close to the retina, but as you age, the gel starts to soften up a little bit, and once these cells start moving around a little bit more, they'll get close to the retina, and then you'll look at a bright light, which could be a white wall, up at the sky, computer screen, even a book. And next thing you know, you're seeing these things float in front of your face. Mm-hmm. Well, these are these floaters that get in front of the macula when you're trying to look and read. And they'll come and they'll go. And then they'll come back and they'll go again. So, these things are just kind of floating around in the interior of your eye. And if you're seeing the same few all the time, well, don't worry about it. Okay. For the most part, it's no big deal.
Okay.
If you see 100 of them all at once, you better be on the phone to a doctor right away.
Okay.
Because that typically means there's some inflammation going on in the back of the eye that's throwing more cells into the center, and you're seeing a lot of them. But the flashes, we kind of we group flashes and floaters together because sometimes we'll see both of those at the same time. But flashes are much more significant. Because, again, as this gel softens up inside the eye, you may move your eye, and this gel will bounce against the retina, and boom, you'll see a flash of light. Well, if it's the gel that's just separating from the back of the eye, it's not that big a deal. But you'll see the same thing if the retina itself tears away from the back of the eye. So if you do see flashes, you do need to go see a doctor to see if it's just the vitreous detaching or if it's actually the retina detaching. And every minute matters, because if it's the retina detaching, it's, time is money.
Yeah.
The sooner the better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a challenge. So again, if you're seeing flashes of light, don't wait, just get it checked out just to make sure.
Right. And I know that nutritionally, the hemp seeds and hemp oils are very high in nutrition. You had mentioned, you said that they're about 80% essential fatty acids, and that's in like 1 tablespoon, like 1 tablespoon of oil. And then there's like 10 grams of protein in that same amount with 10 amino acids. Is that your preferred method of consuming hemp seed or hemp oil for nutritional purposes? Or would, I would guess that the smoking isn't specifically for nutritional purposes, but what is your preferred method of ingestion or, consumption?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, foods or supplements. And like I said, I consult for one of the CBD companies, and they have They have capsules, they have gel caps, they have sprays, they have drops.
Tinctures. Yeah.
They have a balm. They have balms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, for example, my masseuse uses the CBD salve on her hands to relieve the tension from the muscles, because she's working her hands all the time.
Yeah.
So again, I have people who eat CBD for backaches, for neck pain. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So it's, no matter how you're getting it in, as long as you're getting it in.
Right.
And you don't smoke CBD. Yeah.
Oh, you don't smoke. CBD isn't in an inhalation form, even like with vaping, or
right. Yeah.
It's in tinctures or liniments.
Yeah. Now there can be extracts of CBD, and that, for example, I have people that I know who are they're extracting either by infusing cannabis into oil, but mostly that's THC. So people can actually use this oil as a cooking oil. It's coconut oil or canola oil, and so they can use it cooking or as a salad dressing, things like that.
Yeah.
But again, that's THC.
Right. Okay.
Mostly CBD is.
Okay. Great. Well, that's great. We've got, looks like that's it for our questions. That was a lot of good information. If anybody's got more questions, go ahead and drop us a line. Other than that, I want to just thank you for sharing this information with us. It sounds like we need a lot more research. Are you able to do any type of research in your practice? Is there a way for practitioners to actually research and provide any kind of case studies?
Yeah, I mean, you could do some clinical research on your own, but it's, again, the medical model, as you know, they use pharmaceutical research for nutrition, and it rarely lives up to the hype. Nutrition research is totally different than, pharmaceutical research.
Right.
So I think it's the same thing. It needs to be done. A lot of the universities are looking at getting CBD, working with CBD. And again, I think we're going to have to rely mostly on international research to show us what's going on.
Yeah, and
until we get the laws changed here.
One of the things that I've seen a lot more recently is the effects of cannabis with head trauma, and like with athletes. There's a lot of really
Absolutely.
good.
And as a matter of fact, yeah. Well, as I mentioned, with Parkinson's and with Alzheimer's, there's a lot of research going on with that. Again, with Riding with Larry, Part 3, I mean, it's just kind of an amazing thing, and it's real time, and you see how it affects them. And here's somebody who is totally non-functional, and puts in, takes a little bit of cannabis, and within 4 minutes is perfectly still.
Right.
So it's really an amazing video to see to make a difference.
Yeah, and seizures. I've seen the children responding with these unbelievably persistent seizures, and yeah, they're just. So I guess it's a conclusion. We need more research. Lots more research.
Well, again, you got to remember that the these are analogs of essential fatty acids. And, our brain has very highly concentrated EPA, DHA. So, it's a lot of, essential fatty acids in the brain and nervous system. So it makes sense that these would have positive effects on the nervous system.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks again, Jeff, for this insightful presentation and the research that you have been able to come up with. I know that it's challenging. Please, keep us posted when you find more research on this area with ocular health. Thanks for being with us today, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in the future.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Take care now.
All right. You too. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I just want to let you know that we have a webinar coming up in June with Paul Check, and he will be discussing the underlying challenges of addiction, obesity, and disease, and key behavioral patterns. So please mark your calendars for Thursday, June 14th, and we will look forward to seeing you then. And have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.